Imagine, the 17th century, an aristocrat in a powdered wig prepares for a rendezvous. In his hands there's no shimmering foil, but something far more prosaic, a dried and oiled lamb's intestine. Before use it needs to be soaked in water. It's unreliable, crude, and fastened to the body with a silk ribbon. Yet this isn't a whim. It's the only thin barrier between him and a torturous death from syphilis. What you're about to see is the incredible journey from this gruesome contraption to a technology that has saved millions of lives. How did a desperate need for safety compel humanity to progress from oiled animal guts to high-tech latex? And how did this journey transform not only sex but society itself? This is the mission of our investigation. We will trace how the fear of death and the desire for pleasure drove this progress. This is not just the story of an object, but of human ingenuity born from vulnerability. This story will pique your curiosity and at times disgust you, but most importantly, it will make you feel our shared vulnerability. We take safety for granted, yet just a few generations ago, every intimate encounter could have been the last. This is a journey into a world where risk was not a metaphor, but a part of life. We'll peek into the bedrooms of pharaohs to uncover their ritualistic contraceptives. We'll learn how the syphilis epidemic spawned the first true invention. We'll see Casanova inflate them like balloons to check for holes, and how Charles Goodyear, mired in debt, accidentally dropped a mixture of rubber and sulfur onto a hot stove, discovering the process we now call vulcanization. This discovery changed everything. But before vulcanization, millennia. Let's travel back to 1350 BCE, ancient Egypt. In the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun, a thin linen sheath is found. Analysis confirms traces of his DNA on it, but its purpose remains a mystery. Contraception, protection from disease, or merely a ritualistic adornment for the afterlife. A bit later, a Greek myth tells of King Minos, whose semen contained not just poison, but snakes and scorpions, a vivid image of deadly peril. To protect his partners, he used a goat's bladder. But these were isolated, elite instances. Ancient Rome went further. Dried bladders and intestines of goats and sheep became an attempt to control the process. This was no longer just a ritual, but a technology. Yet again, the question arises, birth control or protection? Most likely both. However, it was accessible only to a select few. This was the ancient Roman equivalent of a Rolex or a Ferrari, an item of incredible luxury and status, available only to senators and patricians. A common legionary or peasant couldn't even dream of such a thing. Now take a moment to imagine. You don't just need to use such a device, but first, you have to craft it. Dry animal intestines. Clean them. Test their strength. What emotions does this evoke? Disgust. Or perhaps respect for the ingenuity of our ancestors, for their desperate desire to take fate into their own hands with whatever was available. With the fall of the Roman Empire, this knowledge was lost, or worse, deliberately forgotten. Church fathers, such as St. Augustine, condemned any form of contraception, citing the biblical story of Onan. Sex not directed towards procreation was considered a mortal sin. This simple belief halted the development of safety technologies for nearly 1,000 years. A vacuum ensued, soon to be filled with fear. All these scattered attempts were merely a prelude. The true desperate need for protection was not born from a desire to control birth rates. It arose from a panicked fear of a new epidemic that ravaged Europe by the millions. It was called the Great Pox. Ironically, the French called it the Neapolitan disease, the Neapolitans called it the French disease, and the Russians called it the Polish disease. No one wanted to claim it as their own, but it was this universal dread that became the engine of progress. The late 15th century, Europe was in agony. Syphilis didn't just kill, it devoured flesh, leaving gaping holes where noses once were. It drove people mad, turning aristocrats into babbling lunatics. It was transmitted to children, who were born blind and doomed. The only cure was mercury. Patients were locked in hot ovens and forced to inhale its toxic fumes. Often this treatment killed faster and more painfully than the disease itself. It was a desperate situation demanding desperate solutions. And a solution came from the world of science. In 1564, Italian anatomist Gabriele Falloppio described his invention in a posthumously published treatise, De Morbo Gallico, on the French disease. He proposed a linen pouch soaked in a chemical solution. Its purpose was not birth control, but solely to protect soldiers from syphilis. Falloppio claimed he tested it on 1,100 men, and none contracted the disease. Essentially, this was the first historically documented clinical trial of a barrier protection method. What was it exactly? A small linen sheath that covered only the glands. Before use, it had to be soaked in a mixture of herbs and salts, a primitive antiseptic, and yes, it had to be tied with a ribbon. Imagine not a condom in the modern sense, but rather a medicinal, antiseptic thimble worn before battle. Its task was not to prevent pregnancy, but to disinfect the battlefield. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the technology advanced. Crude linen gave way to thinner, more elastic materials, processed intestines and bladders of sheep, goats, and even fish. They were cleaned for hours, soaked in lye, treated with sulfur, and dried on forms. This was manual, painstaking work. Entire workshops, such as those in London's Charing Cross, were dedicated to their manufacture. Workers, often women, manually stretched and stitched the delicate material. Each item was unique, like a craftsman's piece, and cost a week's wages for a common laborer. Let's pause for a moment and look at this through the eyes of a woman of that era. For her, this device, brought by a man, was not just protection for him. It was the only, albeit extremely unreliable, chance not to die a torturous death from a disease her partner might carry. It was a matter of survival, not pleasure or birth control. And there's a detail here that shocks us today. These items were reusable. After use, they were carefully washed, dried, and diligently stored until next time. They were sold in pubs, barber shops, and apothecaries. They were often kept in special, richly decorated wooden or silver boxes, like a precious jewel. It was not just a hygiene item, but an expensive accessory that was treasured. These costly armor pieces were available only to aristocrats, wealthy merchants, and soldiers, who were sometimes issued them. But one man not only used them but transformed them into part of his image, an instrument of seduction and almost scientific testing. His name was Giacomo Casanova, and his diaries provide invaluable insight into how this worked in practice. For Casanova, these English riding coats, as he called them, were not just protection but a tool. He was history's first tester. He wrote in Story of My Life, "I would take these little pouches and inflate them to ensure their reliability." This was his personal QC, quality control, before each rendezvous. He chose them by color and fineness, transforming precaution into an element of the seduction ritual. It was in his era that a key shift occurred. The condom ceased to be merely a shield against syphilis. It became a means of contraception for the aristocracy. This happened during the Enlightenment, when ideas of personal freedom and control over one's destiny were at their peak. The condom became the physical embodiment of this idea, the ability to separate pleasure from consequences. This was revolutionary. It gave women the illusion of control and men freedom from obligation. But at what cost? Let's introduce a reliability scale from 1 to 10, where 10 is a modern latex condom with electronic testing. Casanova's device, made from lamb's intestine and tied with a ribbon, would score at best 3 points on this scale. According to medical historians, the breakage rate for such items could reach 30 to 40%. For comparison, modern condoms, when used correctly, have a failure rate of less than 2%. Each time, Casanova was literally playing Russian roulette. The high price and demand gave rise to a shadow market. Buying a condom became a lottery. A vast number of fakes appeared, and even worse, used items. There were entire underground laundries where used condoms collected from brothels were hastily cleaned, powdered with talc, and resold as new. This was a deadly business built on desperation, where the stakes were higher than just money. Guts and bladders represented the limit of organic technologies. They could not be made cheaper, more reliable, or more accessible to the masses. Humanity had hit a wall. The world was on the cusp of the Industrial Revolution, and the next step required an entirely new, artificial material. And it was discovered almost by accident, thanks to a piece of rubber forgotten on a hot stove. The man who dropped that piece was Charles Goodyear. The year was 1839. He wasn't trying to spark a sexual revolution. His goal was something more mundane. He was obsessed with taming rubber, a sticky, capricious substance that melted in the heat and cracked in the cold. Goodyear was so obsessed and impoverished that his children played with balls made from his failed experiments, and he continued his experiments even in debtor's prison. His discovery was the result not of a brilliant epiphany, but of thousands of failed attempts and unyielding stubbornness. He accidentally mixed rubber with sulfur and dropped it on a hot stove. What resulted was a miracle. It was like baking sticky dough to turn it into a strong and elastic bun. He named this process vulcanization, and it forever changed the world of materials. And almost immediately, someone thought to apply this technology to condom production. The first rubber items were monsters by modern standards. Imagine a thick, crude thing resembling a section of a bicycle inner tube with a noticeable seam in the middle where two halves were fused. They were reusable and sold with the expectation of years of service. This was a giant leap forward in reliability, but a huge step back in sensation. The thickness of such armor reached 1 to 2 millimeters. For comparison, the thickness of a modern ultra-thin condom is about 0.04 millimeters. That's a 50-fold difference. On our reliability scale, it would score a solid 7, but on the sensation scale, barely a 1. But the main achievement of rubber was not in strength, but in economics. Vulcanization allowed for mass production. The price plummeted. The condom ceased to be an aristocrat's expensive accessory, kept in a silver box. It became a commodity accessible to the factory worker, the office clerk, the soldier in the barracks. And this caused panic. Conservative society saw this not as a breakthrough in healthcare, but as a threat to morality, family, and most importantly, birth rates, the primary resource of empires and nations. In the United States, this fear materialized in the Comstock laws of 1873. Special Postal Agent Anthony Comstock lobbied for a law that equated any information about contraception with pornography. Now sending condoms or even brochures about their use through the mail became a federal crime. The authorities feared that accessible safety would lead to the moral degradation of the nation. For the first time in history, the condom became not just an object, but a battlefield, a battle for control over the body, information, and the future of society. But while governments waged war on information, technology was preparing its own breakthrough. In the early 1920s, crude rubber received a technological knockout. The liquid gold of the sexual revolution appeared, latex. The process was ingeniously simple. Glass molds were dipped into a vat of liquid latex, which coated them evenly. The result was a seamless, thin, elastic, and incredibly cheap product. This revolution was accomplished by the Polish-German inventor Julius Fromm in 1916. His Fromm's Act became the world's first seamless condom. He created a technology that is essentially still in use today. Latex made condoms so cheap that it became more cost-effective to discard them than to wash them. This completely changed the approach to hygiene and convenience. Brands emerged, along with colorful packaging and strict quality control. The condom became a modern consumer product. It was then, in 1929, that the Durex brand appeared. Its name is an abbreviation of 3 words: durability, reliability, and excellence. They weren't just selling rubber, they were selling confidence. Decades passed, and in the 1980s the world faced a new plague, AIDS. History came full circle. Like syphilis 400 years before, AIDS once again transformed the condom from a simple contraceptive into a vital medical tool. U.S. Surgeon General C. Everett Koop made a historic statement in 1986, calling condoms the primary weapon against HIV. After this, according to WHO data, global production and use of condoms increased several-fold in a single decade, from 5 to nearly 10 billion units per year. Public opinion turned 180 degrees. Governments worldwide, which once banned them, now pleaded. They launched safe sex campaigns. Condoms began to be advertised on television. From a shameful product bought furtively, it transformed into a symbol of responsible behavior. In the UK, the famous Don't Die of Ignorance campaign ran. featuring ominous gravestones and the voice of actor John Hurt. It was so direct and frightening that it forever changed the nation's attitude toward the issue. Today's reliability is the result of relentless technology. Every single item is stretched onto a metal electrode form and passed through a high-voltage field. If there's even one microscopic hole in the latex, a short circuit occurs, and the machine rejects the item. 100% inspection is the standard. Polyurethane and polyisoprene alternatives have emerged for people with latex allergies. Ultra-thin, with various textures and lubrication, the choice has become almost limitless. The story has come full circle. From a linen pouch protecting against one epidemic to high-tech latex becoming the primary weapon in the fight against another. We have traced this journey, but what lessons can we draw from it today? The answers might surprise you. The first lesson: crisis is the main driver. The greatest innovations in this story were not born out of comfort, but out of a panicked fear of deadly epidemics, first syphilis, then AIDS. Desperation, not complacency, was the true engine of progress. The second lesson: material is everything. This entire history is essentially a quest for the ideal substance, from unreliable organics, through crude rubber, to the near-perfect balance of latex. It's an evolution from the butcher shop to the chemical laboratory. And the third lesson: accessibility changes the rules of the game. Once technology made protection cheap and widespread, it caused tectonic shifts in social norms, sexual behavior, and demographics. We've seen the whole story. And now the main question: what, in your opinion, was the primary driver of this incredible evolution? Primal fear of death or the eternal pursuit of pleasure without consequences? Write just one word in the comments: fear or pursuit. Let's see which is more prevalent.